For the final session of the Covering Equitable Community Development Fellowship, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that there is a United Way office in every community that each of you fellows live in. And I'd also say it's a pretty safe bet to say that you have a perception of what the United Way does in terms of giving grants to community organizations and maybe convening town hall meetings, etc. But after 3 days of conversations about community development, about the intersection of policy, equity, advocacy, I think it's time now that we explore how the United Way of Missoula County has sort of pivoted from that old world model to a much more responsive and receptive to the community's needs and to the urgent situations in various communities. And so we've got a lot of good people here today who can tell you how that collaboration works and how you should perhaps go back to your community and assess what United Way is doing there. So first we're going to start with Susan Hay Patrick. Susan is the Chief Executive Officer of United Way of Missoula County, and her past experience includes serving as a Deputy Director of Feeding America, which is one of the nation's 10 largest nonprofits. She's also worked as a fundraiser and communications director in DC. Interestingly, Susan was also a journalist, and she has also been a corporate communications writer for a Fortune 500 country. So basically, we're not going to get anything past Susan Hay Patrick today. And she's the perfect target audience for us today. Next, we're joined by Damian Chase-Begaye. He describes himself as currently in his second career as an associate research professor of social epidemiology at U of M School of Public and Community Health Sciences. What you need to know about Damian is he was, in his first career, or his prior career, he was the health director for the city and county, or just the city? City and county, Missoula City and County Public Health Department during COVID. So this is someone who has some unique insights for us about responding to emergencies, crises, and needs of various communities. In his current work, he focuses on creating culturally based substance abuse prevention interventions for urban and multicultural, multi-tribal indigenous communities. So we will certainly look forward to hearing from him. And we're joined by Josh Slotnick. Slotnick. He serves as a member of the Missoula County Board of Commissioners, representing District 3. Among his many accomplishments, he's been farming here in Missoula with his wife since 1992. And in 1996, he co-founded Garden City Harvest and the Peas program in the Environmental Studies program at U of M. And I think Josh is going to bring us really solid insights into that intersection of policy and what communities actually need. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know that you, Damian, have to head out and head to Washington, over to Walla Walla, Washington soon. So we're going to start with Susan's presentation, because in my early conversations with Susan, I was just fascinated by all of the ways that United Way of Missoula County is reaching out, connecting, collaborating with various sectors of the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan, and she's going to get us started.
Thank you. It's so great to have welcomed you all here and to have sat in on so many of the sessions. I did start life as a daily newspaper reporter in my home state of Connecticut, and it really formed a lot of who I am as a person, I think. And some of my favorite people remain reporters, and I also think we're the funniest people in any profession, because we, cover serious things, but we can't take ourselves too seriously. And if you can't find humor in even the worst possible situation, it makes your life much more, I think, heavy and burdensome. So I hope you've all had some fun while you're all been learning. So I know we've all suffered death by PowerPoint, so I'm going to try to blow through these slides quickly and talk about today's United Way versus what I call the old way. We have the old way of the 20th century, and then, so we were founded in 1931. We've been around a long time. No truth to the rumor that I was there at the beginning. We were really founded by this guy, Bill Gallagher, but in the interest of equity, I always like to include Rosemary, because although she did not work outside the home, she was absolutely critical to everything Bill did. And it was the old community, that's about the average age of most United Way donors, by the way, but we're trying to change that. It was the old community chess model. You give us money, we give it away. Most of the money was collected from people in workplaces. We would come into even the Missoulian newsroom and ask you to give a little bit or a lot from your paycheck every week or every month so that it would add up to something. You know, if you gave $10 a week, that's $500. I'm an English major, so I don't like to do math, but that's a little over $500 a year. And then in the 80s, we started to go after individual givers who weren't in the workplace, mostly at the $500 and up level. And then we made grants to many worthy nonprofits. They were unaligned, and there was very little prevention focus. We were good. I always say that we did a lot of good, but we didn't get good done. And I think that illustrates kind of a challenge that we have as a society, especially with nonprofits. We are really good at helping people after they fall out of the boat. We're not as good as helping them stay in the boat. In this time span, 2009 to 13, we moved to being a collective impact United Way. That's kind of a buzzword these days, but this is the definition. It's sort of getting everybody on the same page, working together to identify problems, craft solutions, implement them, evaluate them. They have several common, collective impact initiatives have several common things, a common agenda, a shared measurement system, robust communications, a backbone organization, and United Way is a backbone organization for many of these programs that we work on education, financial stability, and health, including with my friends that you will hear from shortly. Why did we make the shift? Basically, change wasn't happening fast enough. And United Way as a movement, United Way Worldwide, was sort of on this bandwagon along with the Ford Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Many other major philanthropic organizations were realizing the same thing we were realizing. We were making all these grants, we were supporting all these organizations, but what was the progress? And in Missoula, as you see, we had a lot of things that were still going wrong, and we weren't really moving the needle in the right direction. And as I like to say, as the graphic says, we were using a garden hose to fight things that really needed a fire hose. So all these programs are programs for which United Way is the backbone organization. I'm going to talk about all of them. The last two, we are the fiscal sponsors of the Montana Black Collective Missoula, which Murray talked about on yesterday. Murray serves on my board. And Transvisible Montana, which amplifies the voices and protects the rights of transgender Montanans. And we support them in many different ways. They're not official United Way programs, but we are their fiscal sponsor. So, sorry, I don't really know how to make PowerPoint, so if it's cut off, it's probably my fault.
No, it's not all of them.
Oh, okay. We are very active in homelessness in our community through the temporary safe outdoor space, which you've learned about, which in 2023 had a 73% success rate, 65 people going into permanent housing. Eight, right? I said I'm an English major, don't let me do math. 8% going into long-term recovery, after which they will go into housing. We have a housing solutions fund, which has helped probably a few thousand Missoulians get or stay housed, a flexible fund that caseworkers can access to get their clients housed or prevent them from falling into homelessness. Things like first and last month's rent, security deposit, a utility bill in arrears that shows up on their credit report. It's a mighty little engine that could, funded with public and private sources. And then we are a thought partner for our nonprofit providers, policymakers. We fund the annual point in time count, which is linked to how much federal funding comes to your community. We educate the public and policymakers about the myths and realities of homelessness, and we fund continuous improvement training for frontline providers who are always interested in serving clients better. Montana's always been in the top 5 for suicide prevention in our country. In Missoula County, the suicide rate has been dropping for over 3 consecutive years, in large part due to the work, the collective impact approach of Project Tomorrow Montana. Before Project Tomorrow, we had many organizations, including this university, working on suicide, but they were never sitting at the same table together. So one hospital didn't know what the second hospital was doing, which didn't know what Curry Health Center on campus was doing, which didn't know what law enforcement, veterans groups, other nonprofits were doing. So these are some of the things we've done. We've normalized help seeking. We brought the 988 crisis lifeline to Missoula, which has one of the highest answer rates in the nation, 97% answer rate, meaning that chances are 97% of the time it'll be answered on your first try. Distributing gun locks. Most suicide deaths in Montana are completed using guns, so gun locks are a known deterrent. And so we know it's working. Let's move Missoula. Okay, does anybody know what 5210 stands for except you two? It's a program that we encourage kids and families to eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time or, farting around on your phone, 1 hour of moderate to vigorous physical activity, and 0 sugar-sweetened beverages. We work a lot through the schools, but it's an easy thing that most Missoula school kids know what 5210 is. We also have a program where we send volunteers to our highest need schools, and they engage kids in active play on the playground during recess. So they're not just standing around talking. It had we did a survey last year of the teachers, 100% satisfaction, 87% reported fewer disciplinary infractions, meaning fewer kids going to the principal's office because they were out playing, and better concentration in school. We want to expand it to all of our schools, but as I always say at United Way, the answer is money. What's the question? It all depends on funding. Very unusual for a United Way, we have a wildfire prevention program. It's actually not a wildfire prevention program. It is a program to prevent catastrophic fire damage in the wildland urban, property damage from fire in the wildland urban interface. Missoula is one of the highest risk areas in the nation for wildfire. The only parts of our community that are deemed wildfire safe are the mall and the airport. More and more people moving to Missoula move into what we call the WUI, the wildland urban interface, where sort of suburbia meets the forest. And there are a lot of things that homeowners and property owners can do to mitigate damage on their lands. And so we work, it's a cost share program, and we work with homeowners throughout the county to reduce this risk. And we just got through the county, we work partnership with the county, and we work on public and now private property as well. Did I miss one? Did I miss 0 to 5? Hang on a second. Yeah, because I got a little heavy-handed here. We want to give our kids a strong start in life, ensuring that Missoula kids get to school with the services and supports their families have had available to them, so that kids start kindergarten ready to learn. So we do a kindergarten entry assessment, which is a look at the whole child by the teacher and the family in the first couple of months of school. From there, we learned that just 43% of kids enter kindergarten fully ready. When we figure out what factors are in their lives that help them get to kindergarten ready, we try to bring those factors to those who are not kindergarten ready. It helps us target intervention efforts. Things like a regular bedtime are a factor that correlates to kindergarten readiness. Being part of our Dolly Parton's Imagination Library that sends 3,000 free brand new books once a month to all enrolled kids in Missoula and Mineral County is a factor that correlates with kindergarten readiness. If you look up the Parent Leadership Training Institute, PLTI, it's a national program. We sponsor it in Missoula. It sort of amplifies the voices of parents and caregivers who historically haven't been at the table where decisions are made. It helps give them the skills they need to be stronger advocates for their families. We have open to 6 classroom childcare. You heard about it from my colleague Sally the other day, a shared services model in an old elementary school. We distribute 800 fully stuffed brand new backpacks, and we engage in legislative advocacy. I'm not sure that it came up in the previous sessions, but our legislature meets for 90 days every 2 years. So it really is a citizen legislature. Some of us wish it would meet every 90 years for 2 days because it's overwhelmingly regressive, in my opinion. But all the more important that we are in Helena advocating for the people and programs we believe are important. We are the backbone organization for the Missoula Nonprofit Center and Volunteer Missoula. Volunteer Missoula is a website that links organizations that have volunteer needs with people who want to volunteer. My favorite one is Baby Hat Tagger at one of our hospitals. If they knit a hat for every new baby and then somebody tags them. So my next career, I'm going to be a baby hat tagger. And apparently there are wildflowers involved because there are flowers on my slide. We are the fiscal sponsor of the Missoula Community Jedi Network. You heard about that, I think, yesterday. We are in the process of developing a very ambitious, aspirational goal of a community-wide action plan to guide Missoula in making Missoula more equitable. And we're doing it in an atmosphere when, as you all know, people are pushing back on Jedi as some woke nonsense. So, but we're going to continue to try to lead the way. Thriving United Way is a framework that United Way Worldwide has defined what makes a thriving United Way. And I highlighted the equitable thing because the world's largest nonprofit, United Way Worldwide, is really heavily focused on equity. And this will help guide and give traction to our efforts. What are our challenges? Again, there's never enough money. Public awareness and understanding. 97% of Americans know the name United Way. 66% know what we do. So reporting by people like you can help close that gap. Our opportunities and strengths. We are a trusted community resource. When something happens on education, financial stability, health, community resilience in Missoula, people want to know what's United Way doing about it. We are very nimble. I hope my colleagues will talk about this. We can move quickly. We are not constrained by overwhelming process. Basically, you have to get through me to get something done. We have very strong partnerships with local government, the city and county. That Thriving United Way status, I think, really helps us define and execute on our mission. And we do have a very engaged board, including Damian, and a terrific staff of 7 and volunteers. So here are things that I thought you might want to ask when you go back. What's going on in collective impact in your communities? Mike Nugent talked about the lower percentage of land that's zoned for housing that's actually affordable. What's that look like in your town? What's your sidewalk map look like? When we showed our policymakers the sidewalk map in Missoula, the rich neighborhoods were all green, meaning completely sidewalked. The poorer neighborhoods were all red, no sidewalks. We heard from Jim Hicks and others about the demographics of homelessness. What's happening in your community? Are these really important principles of equity embedded in what's happening in your town on policy? And then is your United Way thriving? Or is it stuck in that old model of you give us money, we give it away? These are things that I wish local reporters in Missoula would do and not do. I told you prevention, it's hard to cover, it's hard to illustrate, but it is so important. We tend to focus on problems. You know, we're showing all the disasters of the hurricane. We're not showing the people who got to safety. We're not showing some of the good things that were done. Listen to the voices, that disability rights movement phrase, nothing about us without us. Really try to adopt that. Stop talking about the homeless. They are not monolithic. What works for the single mom and her kids aging out of foster care, is not going to work for the guy on the courthouse lawn living in a wheelchair. And then sometimes I think we tend to focus too much on numbers rather than on outcomes. So, they serve 1,000 people a day. Well, why are they there? Why do 1,000 people need the help? And then finally, the Democracy Fund has this great quote about why this is all important. Because we want to build power and an inclusive multiracial democracy, and that's why your work is more, I hate it when people say something is more important than ever, but it really is more important than ever. Thank you very much.
I get the feeling that Susan should have been running the show all along.
No, trust me.
Josh and Damian, why don't you come
up?
up?
Anything.
So Damian, I want to, before we have to let you go, take us back to being the public health director, COVID, trying to pull together all of these different resources, et cetera. Tell us about how United Way of Missoula County fit into that picture.
So the great thing is that United Way was already in that picture. One of the things, because I think technically it's past its funding, so Susan didn't talk about it, was Invest Health.
Lisa did a panel.
Oh, did we? Okay,
Yeah.
so you guys got to talk to we call her Lisa B, Lisa Biskevich. And so United Way was key in organizing Invest Health and supporting the Invest Health work. And what Invest Health did was it brought just players from very different worlds together. So it brought the healthcare providers, it brought the researchers, it brought the folks, that were, and people like me who, my house has no sidewalk. And so people who are like, we need to see some change in our community, and I know that because I'm living it, and bringing us all to the same table and working toward some solutions. And those types of relationships were they were key, they were critical when it came to our efforts to respond to COVID here in Missoula. And then, so really we went straight from responding to COVID to responding to the houselessness crisis here in Missoula. And you might think, well, COVID's a medical condition. That's very different than houselessness. Honestly, when it comes to the work that needs to get done, it's really not that different. We had a lot of the same players at the table. A lot of those relationships were in place because United Way brings people together who often, it's not even just that we're not in the same room, it's that I don't even know they exist. Like, I didn't know, city planners before Invest Health. I'd never met one in all my years. And so we mentioned the City County Health Department, but I was actually only there for a few years. My real background's Indian Health. And so I ran our Indian Health Center here in Missoula. And, as the director of All Nations, I'd never met a single city planner, ever. Never had an opportunity to really look at people who were broadly looking at different aspects to the same problem until Invest Health. And that was really key for the work that we're doing.
Before we let you go, I really want you to expand on our early conversation. I shared with Damian that my best friend lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and worked for United Way for many years. One of the reasons she left was because of what she described as this sort of paternalistic approach to everything that they did. They felt like they had to not only convene the table, pick the people who were at the table, make the decisions about what was needed, and then bestow a pot of money upon you. So this whole issue of disenfranchised communities and their interaction with United Way, and particularly in this area with the indigenous community being the majority minority, talk a little bit about how United Way Missoula County is turning that on its head.
So when I'm gonna share this story, I want to emphasize it was before Susan's tenure. I am not talking about Susan right now. And honestly, because of my career, so I've worked at Indian Health Centers here in Missoula, but also San Francisco, Oakland, Sacramento, and Portland. And so
he ran the National Association of Indian Health Centers.
Urban Indian Health, yeah.
Urban Indian
Yeah, the
Health
National Council of Urban Indian Health.
And I recruited them to the health department.
Yes.
And I was a reference.
Yes. All of that is true. And so,
We're taking credit for everything.
but so my work really started in tribal youth programs. And so if we go back 20 years ago, there was a particular United Way. It was not United Way of Missoula County, but there was a particular United Way where we approached them and we said, this was when the term youth development was just starting to be a thing. People were like, oh, we need to fund youth development programming. Well, guess what? Indigenous youth have a need for those kinds of services also, and it's not going to look exactly like it does for everyone else, especially in these large communities like Portland, Sacramento, Oakland, and San Francisco. And so we went to the United Way and we said, hey, we want to start a tribal youth development program for our youth. They flat out said, oh, we have zero interest in that. What we're going to do is we're going to work with our community housing program, and we're going to repaint all the houses that they own as part of the community housing program. The frustrating thing there is that most of the houses owned by this community housing program in Portland, Oregon, were less than 10 years old. They weren't repainting it because the houses needed to be repainted. They were repainting it because the organization also had a very paternalistic model and never included residents in their planning. And so they designed these houses to be very unwelcoming. And now that they were 10 years in, the residents were like, we hate coming to our home. It's ugly. And so if they had included those people in the design, one, they wouldn't need to be doing the repainting anyway. Two, that was what I call the look good, feel good work. It was not the do good work. A tribal youth development program has a return on investment that literally impacts generations. Those tribal youth that benefit from that program become parents of youth who are going to be more advantaged than if their parents had not participated in that programming. And that cycle goes on. And we ended up going to it took a couple more years, but we got another private foundation to fund that work. I have never had an experience in my time since Susan's been at United Way of Missoula County, where I've said, this is something that's very upstream, but it's very important, and had a response, but it's not sexy. Susan's thing is, okay, it needs to get done. How do we get it done? And again, I wish. Susan she's never written me a 7-figure check in my life. I'll look forward to the day, but it's not about being, the checkbook problem solver. It's let's do what we can to support you in building relationships, in whatever you can do to develop that programming. And that has honestly been, not only has it been more effective, but it has, when Susan was talking about, it has started to make the indigenous community in Missoula trust United Way in a way that they wouldn't have 20 years ago.
I know we have to let you go, but I want to allow for any urgent questions for Damian before he has to leave. If anybody does have a question for him, please do before I let you go. But I want to, my final question to you is, isn't it really about who has a seat at the table? Because it's not necessarily that people are racist or whatever. It's that if your lived experience does not include things like, we need something other than having our houses painted, then you're going to make decisions that come from your space, your worldview. Isn't that really a part of what you're talking about?
So one of my just most respected mentors in Indian health has this saying, and I'm sure there's other people who have it, but he's the one that I've always heard it from, where he says, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And he's the one who really taught me that in order to really have a say in what happens, you need to be at the table when decisions are being made, not downstream after those decisions are starting to have impact. And really, so when we saw both the need for better equity in our response to COVID here locally, because the other thing too is, so we had a legacy health director who was the health director for the first part of COVID, and then I came in May of 2021. Honestly, when we thought COVID was over, it turned out that was not the case. So that was right before Delta and Omicron and all that stuff. We thought when she retired, thinking I'm not leaving you in the middle of a pandemic, but it turned out she was. But for that, so when you think of March 2020 to about April 2021, our initial response to COVID here in Missoula was not as equitable as it could have been or should have been. And I couldn't get to tables that I didn't even know about. And these two people sitting next to me are the ones who are like, we have to make sure that Damian is a person, but also that all nations, that our indigenous community is at these tables. In doing that, what we're going to do is change how profoundly this pandemic is going to impact on our Indigenous community.
Going once, going twice. Any questions for Damian before he has to leave?
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. My name's Amanda Goki, and I cover New Hampshire for the Boston Globe. My question to you, Damian, is about your sort of outreach efforts, how you stay grounded in the community needs, and how you sort of balance that with, like, you as an individual having your take on maybe what you think is the right approach. But, like, how do you check your blind spots? How do you gut check? How do you make sure that you're doing that outreach work, that what you're bringing to those tables when you have that responsibility for representing this community, the diverse community that you represent? Like, how do you balance those things?
So some feedback that I received, it might have been from Josh, but I'm pretty sure Josh had stepped off the board. So at Missoula Public Health, we have a Board of Health, and I think it was actually after Josh stepped off, so it didn't come from him. But my Board of Health kind of pushed me, and they're like, staff are saying that they don't see you at your desk. Whereas the previous health director was pretty much tied to her desk. And I was like, as somebody who was out in the community, that bothered me that she was always at her desk. She was not out engaging in the community. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe I swung the pendulum a little too far the other side. But the thing of the matter is, I am not an expert on everybody's lived experience. I'm only an expert on my lived experience, and that can be very different even than the person living next door to me. And so the way sort of, that, because my thing is I'm going to assume that I have a blind spot. And so I'm gonna try to get as much information from as many different perspectives to it, because the thing is, I don't know what I don't know. And so I'll try to find out what I don't know. And I'll do that knowing that I'm still gonna not know some things that I don't know. But the thing is, you never assume that you know enough to be making decisions without information from as many other people as possible.
I know you have to leave, and it's unfortunate, but we do have your contact details, and I know the journalists will want to connect with you. So let's take this opportunity to thank Damian.
Yes. I apologize. I've got a 6-hour drive ahead of me.
Could you just say about the conference that you're doing? Because I think that's equity, right? The nutrition.
Yes. The which one?
Nutrition.
Oh, yeah. So I am also the kind of person where I don't ever seem to have enough to do. And so actually a retired health department employee, she was a nutritionist at the health department, and she retired before I even started there, found me, and she was like, we need to do something about inclusive nutrition and health. We need to make our health department more inclusive for people with physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities, because our programming is not designed for these people. We have nutrition programs, we have public health programs. It's not designed with them in mind. And I was like, absolutely, we need to do better at that. And so this was while I was still it was almost a couple months before I stopped being the health director. I was like, yes, we are absolutely going to work on this. And so what that meant was we actually got some funding from Special Olympics. And next month, because I think this is October, so in November, we are going to be hosting the first ever Montana Summit on Inclusive Nutrition and Health. And that'll be right here on campus.
All right, well, please let us know about it.
Okay, now Susan said I'm allowed to go, so.
And so now it's our turn to speak to the gentleman farmer, the county commissioner. Come and have.
Is it okay if I just?
If you want to, that's fine.
Yeah, they turn that off. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I would love for you to tell us what the community was like when you started farming in 1992, in terms of your feeling connected to different activities, organizations. Give us some insight into that.
Okay. So first, can I say thanks
absolutely.
for having me, and just looking around, seeing it where all y'all are from. Man, what a treat for us that you are here, and what you all bring to our little community just for a snippet expands us also. Thank you for making this choice. And it's also really heartening to see so many young people being involved in journalism, which is absolutely essential to our well-being as a democracy. So good on you for your choices. Thank you. Okay, to your question. What was Missoula like in the early 90s? was radically different than it is right now. Radically different. Early 90s, Missoula was a mill town. We had three big mills running 24/7, 3 shifts a day, 364 days a year, pumping muck up into the sky and keeping thousands of people employed. We're not that anymore, not even close. That Missoula back then, you could buy a house for probably 60% of what national median home price was. And nobody out there knew what Missoula, Montana, where Missoula, Montana was or what it was. It was actually a really sweet place to live. There was this hotbed of art and culture here. Imagine a melon, because I'm a farmer. You got this hard exterior, it's kind of bumpy and knotty. That's that lunch bucket, workaday mill town. Inside, it was soft and sweet. Art like crazy. All these creative writers. We had a great MFA program here, so we had writers and poets and visual artists and sculptors and people going off about politics. It was just this vibrant, alive place underneath this hard, rough shell. And nobody knew about it. And it was really easy to be poor here. I was. It was a cool time in that a person could work part-time and pay your rent, because rent was so low, and then use the other chunk of your time to pursue your passion project. And right now in Missoula, we have all these established institutions, like the one I helped start, Garden City Harvest, which is a food security nonprofit. Also for-profit things like coffee shops and restaurants. All kinds of things that were started a long time ago because young people had the time and space, because the place was cheap, to get these things going. And we reap the cultural benefits of all that work now. Flash forward to the present. All the mills are gone. We don't need them in a sense because the place is so happening. It's actually economically stronger than it used to be. Missoula's economic engine is the place in and of itself. People choose to be here because the quality of life is incredibly high. If you had a chance just to walk around, hopefully you can feel it. On things like river trails, but lots of communities have river trails, bike trails, easy access to beautiful public open space, tons of culture and food and art and music, especially for a place our size. It's all here. Our economic engine is that people choose to live here because of all the things I just said, and then they make their livelihood happen here. Damian was talking about COVID. Well, you all know post-COVID, remote work changed the world. So now you have people who are working on the coasts, spending 90 minutes a day commuting, living in a little rabbit warren of a place, wishing that they could spend their 10-day free days a year mountain biking in a nice spot. And they're like, well, wait a minute. I could move to Missoula. I could take my San Francisco wages and live in the lower Rattlesnake, a sweet little neighborhood, and mountain bike every day. Go to cool shows out at the amphitheater, have my choice of a dozen different breweries, and be surrounded by a whole bunch of like-minded people. I think I'll do that. So we went from our homes being 40-50% of national median home price to now, I can't do the percentages fast enough. Now, if you want to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in Missoula, you're looking at $620,000, $625,000, which is probably similar to the suburbs of Austin. So Missoula's changed a whole lot. Used to be easy to be poor here. It's impossible. You can't. It's just impossible. All those cultural, economic things I was talking about, young people could live here, pay their rent, working part-time, and make really cool stuff happen that contributes greatly to our culture and economy. Well, those folks are priced out. You either had to get here early or come with money. That's the Missoula we live in right now. And this is desperately sad for me as a person. I spent most of my life doing pretty much all of my adult life. I'm a former Peace Corps volunteer, and I just haven't quit since I started. To see that some of this has happened on my watch is a pain I will carry till I'm dead.
I have to jump in here.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Without having known this, I don't think it was in the bio that we got, but the fact that you're a former Peace Corps
Yes.
volunteer comes across so strongly in terms of your energy, in terms of your connectedness to community.
Yeah.
And so one of the themes that we've been focusing on during our conversation is that intersection between that kind of energy and policy. and whether it actually exists.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious, how does someone with your energy, your spirit, your connectedness to community make the decision to join the county commission?
Oh, man. We're not talking about United Way. Is that okay?
You did ask me, though.
I did.
Beginning.
Did I? Oh, good. I've been working in community development for really my whole adult life. And in the time before I chose to run for this office, I got really active in land use and development issues because some of our very best soils were being covered by, I would say, poorly constructed development, 1 house per acre, 1 house per 5 acres. And I got on the Missoula County Consolidated Planning Board, and I talked a lot at City Council, and I became kind of an advocate. And it worked a little bit. And then with some other folks, we realized that real change wasn't going to happen unless some leadership changed. A person who works in statewide politics saw me give a talk about food and farming, and after she said, "You should really run for office." And I was like, wow, I hadn't thought of it, but I do see that we need to change, but I hadn't thought that it would be me. So she set up an appointment with our dear friend, our former mayor, who's passed away recently, which still saddens me, and I went to lunch with him, and he said, "This is what you need to do," and we laid out like a 2-year plan, and I followed that bugger. And ended up here. And it was personally just a great thing to do, because y'all are so young, you might not know this yet. But after you do the same thing for 20 some odd years, even if you love it, you find yourself doing the same thing over and over. And it's so fantastic to have your brain just go bam in a whole new way. I have learned so much new stuff doing this. It's super fun. So the energy around community and policy. Government is super limited, not as much as ours would want us to be, but there's only so much we can do. But partnerships leverage resources. Put that in your head. If partnerships leverage resources. We take not a small local government, but a government that's in a pretty tight box as to what we can and can't do. Because we are an arm of state government. What we can do is prescribed by law. But we can partner with anybody. We can direct them staff time. We can get them money. We can brainstorm. We have the power of influence more than the power of authority. If I call people for maybe they need to get smarter, they'll answer the phone. They'll come to a meeting. This is a power Susan wields so gracefully because she's such an established part of our community. So we can bring people together and make change, not through policy like we changed the law, but we can do a project. Or we can make a commitment to work on something. The big thing we did, the biggest shift in sort of governmental philosophy, which is a little different than policy, but it had a way bigger outcome. The previous county commission to this, their philosophy was this. We need to jealously guard the county's resources. Taxpayer dollars are hard won. They're over here behind us. And this neighborhood group, and this state government, and this trade association, they all want it. They want to get this money. We have to guard that money. Everyone who approaches us is a potential threat. Put your shield up, guard the money.
Department of No.
Department of No. We're gonna do public safety, we're gonna plow the roads, and we're gonna guard this money. And everyone is a threat. And if a new problem arises, our job is to figure out whose responsibility it actually is to solve that problem. It was a viable philosophy. It worked for a while. Thankfully, voters chose a different way to go. And our philosophy is everyone who approaches us, that's another neighborhood group, a community group, a nonprofit, the state, the feds, all of them are potential allies. And absolutely, we are responsible for providing essential services, and we are also responsible for gaining some headway, moving some little bit forward on intractable problems like housing and homelessness and wildfires and climate. Yeah, that's all our job too. Not that we're going to get it done, but we are, and this is our little phrase, we are absolutely going to get caught trying. And we could not do that at all. We would be stuck in the muck were it not for organizations like United Way.
Well, let me ask you to expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And as we send the journalists back to their communities, what is it about how United Way Missoula County operates that sort of speeds up that process?
So I like what Susan always says is, the answer is money, what's the problem? But she is always, always, always game to work on something. Always. The answer is always yes. If it's, will you talk to me about blank? It's always yes. And that conversation, that's like putting the seed in the ground. When you say the words out loud, you're off. If you just keep it in your head, you're stuck. So that's where I'm going. That's right where I was going. That's totally where I was going next. What time is it?
It's 11:20.
Oh, good. I have time to do this. Great. So, COVID happens. Our homeless shelter's got to go to half capacity because you got to sleep 6 feet apart. Where's the other half of the folks going to go? Only half of them can stay in the homeless shelter. The other folks, they're outside. They end up under a bridge alongside the river, living the way human beings do, which means in our era, making a whole lot of garbage next to the river. And we have our rivers rise in the spring. It's going to carry all the garbage away. These are our brothers and sisters living in squalor. And it also makes some people just insanely crazy and angry when they're driving over the bridge and they see blue tarps blowing in the wind or some guy peeing in the bushes. No matter where you are in your sense of, on the spectrum of what you care about, this is a really bad thing. We can't have all these people living under this bridge. The county had access to ARPA dollars, but we don't have staff designed to work on this. We can't hire new people. Susan and I went to lunch, famous lunch now, right, and talked about this. How are we going to do this? We have to find a place where people can be safely. Being under the bridge with no bathrooms, no garbage, no services, this is unsafe for the folks who live there. It's unsafe for the resource itself, for the river, and it doesn't work for regular people either, who are just walking by or driving by. So we basically dreamed something up. We need to come up with a place. And this place has got to meet people's basic needs and help them move forward. So what's the first thing you do when you're faced with a new hard problem? Is you go find out what other people have done when they face that new hard problem. We at the county had access to money. We could take some of that money and get it to United Way, and they sent one of their most brilliant employees off to go look at other places in the Pacific Northwest that have attempted to do similar things. And he came back with a bunch of lessons learned, really, really smart lessons learned, so we didn't repeat the same mistakes. And one of the things we found out is the operation, not the setup, but the operation of this is super crucial, obviously, to its success. And the operation is outside of the capacity of the government. We don't have the skills. We don't know how to do this. So we needed multiple partners. We needed to work with United Way to gather this information, to collect the money. These guys are the main hub resource, but we needed another organization to run the thing day to day. And we could use county resources to do things like make sure plumbing, sewer, septic, utilities, road, parking lot, all that happens. We're really good at infrastructure, but we're not very good at running a campground, basically. So we pulled all this together. Hope Rescue Mission, which is a local nonprofit, ended up doing the operating. And they were operating along the parameters that Eric from United Way discovered when he went out into the greater Pacific Northwest and visited other places. And in pretty short order, from the time we had lunch, a couple months later, there was a safe place for people to camp. That deserves applause, I think. And if we look at other efforts in our greater community around responding to the needs of people who are living outside, this is by far the most successful one. Hands down, this is the model of success, where 60, 70% of the folks have gotten into more permanent housing. And that more permanent housing didn't happen because they got a job in a really expensive place and now can afford rent in a really expensive place. It happened because the services and the stability at the TSOS allowed them to reestablish relationships that had been frayed when they were in the throes of living outside and all the bad stuff that often goes with that. Relationships got repaired and people's informal social safety net came back together. I'm going to guess most everyone in this room, if your life fell apart, you would not be under a bridge, you would be at your parents' house, your sibling's house, a friend's house. So there was somebody there to catch you. That informal safety net is super crucial. It's basically the only one we really have. If that's frayed and something bad happens to you, you're out. The services and the stability at the TSOS allowed many people's informal social safety net to come back together. And so had a place to be. After the T is temporary, the space is permanent, the person stay there is temporary. Nobody gets kicked out, but the idea is they get better and they can move on.
We actually got to visit the TSOS.
Oh, fantastic.
And he was,
Did you meet April?
no, we didn't meet,
met-
we met Rob.
Jim.
Jim?
Jim.
We met Jim, he
yeah.
came and speak,
Yeah.
but who was it that we met last night? Robin, we met Robin at the TSOS site. Fascinating story.
Yeah.
My first thought is we are going to have to clone both Josh and Susan and plant those clones in every United Way and every county commission in the country. Are there any questions?
Nick's got a question.
Hi, yeah. My name is Nick Rosenberger. I'm with Idaho Statesman in Boise. Boise and Missoula have a lot of the same problems. A lot of people moving to town who have a lot more money. And so my question is, how do you connect with residents that have lived here a long time without putting all of the blame on people who are moving here?
Well, the biggest thing we do is this is what Damian was saying, getting out and listening, being out in the community is the absolute main thing. And when it's hard, but when we speak about the changes post-COVID and remote work, I have to be really careful not to demonize any one person. And I never say things like, those people from California came, and there's no us and them in this. This is just the reality. The other thing that I often say is that what happened to Missoula is what happened to Boise. It's what happened to Bend and Bellingham and Bozeman and poor Asheville, North Carolina too. Every place that has a high quality of life has exactly these sets of issues that are associated with prosperity. So it isn't any one spot, it isn't any one group of people. And what folks have done post-COVID, there's nothing wrong with it. Right now we have to respond to these things. And it's super tricky, but I believe in terms of housing, what we ultimately need to do is figure out how to, and this is like heresy to say this, but we need to intervene in the market. We cannot just let the free market run housing. It's a failed economy. A failed economy means it doesn't work for producers and consumers. It doesn't work. Think about like commodity agriculture. Like if you can buy anything made out of a commodity, any grain in the United States for really cheap. And farmers can basically remain afloat. You can basically remain afloat as a wheat farmer, and bread is really cheap. Wow, that economy works. It only works because the federal government has inserted itself, that's all of us together, and given extra money to farmers so they can keep the cost of wheat down so we can all buy stuff. That's a hyper-simplified version of it. But the only reason that economy works is because federal government intervened. I think we are looking at a similar thing with housing in these high amenity places. There has to be some intervention in the market, or the only people who can live here are folks who got in early or showed up with tons of money. And it's hard because we worship that free market. We canonize CEOs, but we got to step in there.
We're going to take two more questions.
Michael's got one.
Who's got the mic?
Michael had his hand up.
Hi.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
Michael Lyle. I'm a reporter with Nevada Current. We're part of the state's newsroom network. I cover housing and homelessness out in Nevada, along with a bunch of other stuff, but that's what I'm really passionate about. I actually have two questions. One, we did visit the temporary shelter last night, and we were able to walk through it. I know this is a conversation a lot of communities are having right now about whether tiny homes and pallet shelters are the way to go. There's still a lot of hard conversations around the use of these, especially with some communities kind of just stopping at it and not kind of constructing more out of it, or even classifying those that are unhoused as permanently housed, even though they're in pallet shelters. I guess, what have you learned about some of those hard conversations? And I have a second question too, just based on what you said about disrupting the market. As an elected official, what are ways that you're looking at policies that actually disrupt the market on the front end too? What are some policies that you've been looking at or working on the commission setting? Yeah, the second question is easier. I'm excited to talk about that one. The first one, if I want to make sure I understand and rephrase that, how are we having these tricky conversations about these temporary? What have we learned? Great. Other communities that are
Yeah.
having pallet shelters
as
like the only measure of housing people, even though that's kind of just the first part in their housing journey.
Okay. Why don't you do that one, Susan, and I'll do the policy one.
I would say that we think of we educate the community constantly that the TSOS is the first step on a larger continuum of housing. And the goal of the TSOS is to give people, surround them with intensive services, meet them where they are. What is it they need to get into housing? And that their stay there will be temporary. It's not a 30 days and you're out or anything like that. It's behavior based. But I don't think anybody in the community considers it permanent housing because we have made it so clear that this is the first step on the road to sustainable housing. And then hopefully you'll get a voucher, or we'll get you through our Housing Solutions Fund into a low-cost housing that you'll be able to sustain. We make sure that people have to pay, I think Jim talked about this, they have to pay utilities, they have to get used to getting mail and all the things that will aid them in their housing retention. Yeah, I think that's
Great.
like, nobody thinks of the TSOS as housing.
So the second one, what's a policy thing where we're intervening in the market? This is one it's versions of this are happening in other places, specifically in the Intermountain West, and this is something I'm trying really hard to start right here. Coming up with a refillable pot of money, given our tax structure that I won't talk about, is the challenge, but I think we're headed that way. Basically, what I want to be able to do is to have us come up with about between 15 and 30% of the value of a home for a first-time home buyer for anyone whose household is at 200% of AMI. So this isn't, what I'm talking about isn't for people who are on the bottom. It's for regular people who are bankable. You would expect them to buy houses in a different time, but now they can't. So we would get them between 15 and 30% as down payment assistance. In trade for that, they put a deed restriction on the property that caps appreciation at 4%, which historically is just fine. It's big enough to create generational wealth and build equity, but it's small enough to blunt the edge of this scorching hot, never coming down real estate market. I would also put residence restrictions on that deed restriction and say somebody in this household has to do in-person work in our county for at least 30 hours a week, so that we can have a place where teachers and physical therapists and new attorneys and brand new engineers or brand new college administrators all can have a place to live. And versions of this happen in other places, but they're much more focused on creating rental property. But I want to do it here on homeownership. And I have to go to another meeting. Thankfully, it's on Teams. I'm going to go right over there. Can I say thank you so much for coming here and for doing the good work you do.
Thank you so much for being here. Your energy is amazing.
Oh, thanks. I feel like I get paid to be myself, which is the best.
Which is totally cool. We're not going to let Susan go yet. Yeah. But so unfortunately, we've come to the end pretty much of our time, but I do want to ask Susan to sort of leave us with some takeaway thoughts about perhaps this opportune moment in time when it comes to journalists really understanding the nuances, the contextual need for interaction, collaboration. What would you say to them as they head home?
Your work is more important than ever. My first thought is that quote from the Democracy Fund about we are never, well, first of all, we're never going to fix things if we keep expecting, I say this to my board when I got a little pushback at one point, and I said, why do we expect oppressed people to fix their oppression? It's up to you people. It's up to people like me. So we're never going to get the society that we want if we are not making sure that everybody's voices are heard and at the table. And it takes a little longer to find those people because they're so unaccustomed to being asked for their opinion. They're so accustomed to the old model of I'm from United Way and I'm here to help. That patronizing way that charity so often has. So finding out who's listening and amplifying those voices and listening to them is one thing I would say. Something that I met your mayor actually in DC at a White House meeting a few months ago, and I right? She, if I'm thinking the same person, was very much like our mayor. In the old days, people would move to Missoula and think, what can I do for Missoula? Now what I see more of is what can Missoula do for me? And trying to reach those people and talk. Missoula has more than, I've lived all over the country, including in some of your cities. Missoula is unique in my experience in that community values are networking and giving back. I joke that Missoulians love to stand around and drink at business after hours events, but that's where connections are made. That's where ideas are sprung. That's people. We are all about connecting and giving back. There are some companies in Missoula that tie their executives' performance evaluations somewhat to the extent of their involvement in the community. So people are expected, it somewhat makes my job a little bit easier because people expect to be asked to give, to donate, to serve on a board, to give their time, treasure, talent. Even I'll ask them to go to Helena and speak to a legislative committee, which is in this legislature, it's a really terrible job. But I think that, I don't know if it's applicable to your communities, but I would welcome any advice as to how do we reach people and try to preserve this essential quality of our communities where we want to think in a communitarian way rather than what's in it for me. And it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
I promised you all that we would end on a high note, and I think we have. And we have come to the end of the Covering Equitable Community Development Fellowship. Once again, I'd like to thank all of the journalists. I'd like to send you back once again to your newsrooms with a different spirit and a different energy about how we cover what it takes to have equitable community development. I'd like to take one more opportunity to thank our funder, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, for convening and helping us put together this program. So safe travels back to your cities and take care.